There's something particularly scary about the violence when it strikes close to home, especially in the heart of a community that's already wary of its own shadows.
And then all of a sudden I heard like 30 gunshots.
Imagine you were walking through your own neighborhood, a place you thought you knew inside out. The streets, the houses, and the familiar faces, they all make you feel like you're at home. But what if that sense of safety is just an illusion? Well, this became all too real when Chanterria Albert, a 23-year-old corrections officer, was tragically shot in a drive-by shooting.
Now I'm just trying to figure out, how I'm gonna live my life without my sister.
Was it an act of revenge, or was it just some random shooting? One thing's clear, these types of incidents have become way too common. So let's unpack why that is, and what we can do to stop them. Imagine it's a typical Tuesday night in Opelousas, Louisiana. The sun has just set, and residents are getting ready to unwind after a long day. But for Chanterria Albert, a 23-year-old corrections officer, this evening is about to take the most tragic turn. Just before 10:30 p.m. on April 23rd, an event occurred that rocked this tight-knit community to its very core. Chanterria was off duty and enjoying a rare evening with friends. She was laughing, sharing stories, and relishing the company of her girlfriends. It was an ordinary moment in so many ways, a brief but much-needed break from the stresses of her demanding job. Then, suddenly and without much warning, the night turned lethal. Around 10:30 p.m., a black car approached the house on Park Avenue where Chanterria and her friends were gathered. Then, out of nowhere, gunfire erupted from inside the car. No confrontation, no reason, just a sudden burst of bullets.
Last night I was in my room, and then all of a sudden I heard like 30 gunshots.
The scene outside the house went pretty crazy fast. People were ducking for cover, screams could be heard coming from everywhere, and the smell of gunpowder was in the air. Everything was over in a few seconds, and in the aftermath of the shooting, Chanterria and another person were lying on the ground, both critically wounded. First responders arrived pretty quickly, finding bullet casings all over the place, a sign of how chaotic those seconds truly were. They took Chanterria and the other victim to Opelousas General Hospital in a race against time to save them. But things were looking pretty bad, and despite the best efforts of the doctors, Chanterria didn't make it. Cases like this are always a tragedy when you remember that Chanterria was just 23.
It's sad to do that.
To think about such a young life ending so suddenly, and so violently nevertheless, is enough to break just about anyone's heart. And I'm sure you're in need of some good news at this point. And luckily for you, I can give you some. You see, the other victim, though seriously hurt, managed to survive this ordeal. It's a small bit of relief, but it just goes on to show how completely random fate can be. The shock of what happened spread through the whole community, and sadly, for many people, this kind of violence is all too familiar. The thing is, Chanterria's murder was the third killing of the year in the area, which means that these types of acts are becoming increasingly more common. But more on that later. After Chanterria's untimely demise, tributes started pouring in left and right, as friends and family were trying to cope with the shock of losing someone they loved so much.
An aunt, a sister, and a mother are left to grieve after 22-year-old Chanterria Mackie Albert was shot and killed last week on Park Avenue.
Now I'm just trying to figure out, how I'm gonna live my life without my sister. I'm forced to live life without my sister. I wish it was just a button I could press just through one time. I just wish I would have held you closer to me and wouldn't have let you live when you left.
She was more than just a corrections officer. She was full of life and had dreams of making a difference. To them, her death wasn't just another statistic. It was a deep personal loss. So who was responsible for all this? Did Chanterria, a woman who, by all accounts, was married to her job, have any dangerous enemies looking to dispose of her? Or was this a random act done by some deranged psycho? Well, after some digging, one thing's for sure. This story only gets weirder from here, so let's get into it and find out how it all went down. But first, it's only fitting that we get to know who Chanterria really was. In cases like this, It's important to sometimes take a step back and realize that there's an actual human being behind the sad headline. They're someone's mother, daughter, or aunt. Either way, we're talking about someone with hopes and dreams, much like you and me. And let me just tell you, Chanterria, or how her friends like to call her, Mackie, was one amazing woman.
Just being who she was, I just want to tell her I love her.
You know those people who just light up any room they walk into? Well, that was Mackie. She was always a joy to be around, and her energy was completely contagious. Have you ever had that one friend who would drop just about anything to come and help you out? That was her. This can even be seen through the job she chose. Now, I know that being a corrections officer doesn't strike you as the most compassionate job at first, but then, once you think about it, it's a job that really boils down to justice. You see, Mackie knew that justice doesn't just pop up whenever it's needed. Someone actually has to step up and do the work that many people tend to shy away from. Why? Because it's real, hard work. We're talking long hours and a whole lot of danger, every single day. But while her job obviously came with all of these risks, Mackie was determined to make a difference. Her mom, Deputy Chanterria Albert, sometimes got worried, of course, but she also understood the fact that Mackie was one ambitious young lady who would stop at nothing to see her goals through. That means that together, they became more than just your average family. They were partners on a mission to uphold justice. That being said, nothing ever got in the way of Mackie showing up and breaking a sweat at her job. Not only that, but colleagues of hers thought the world of her too.
She was a very loving person. Everybody loved Mackie. Mackie was life of a party. Whenever she walked in the room, she just light the room up.
Imagine working with someone in such a tough environment and still having them brighten your day in and day out. She had some big professional dreams too. At just 22, she was already training to become a court liaison, which would have meant more responsibility in overseeing legal proceedings and helping detainees navigate the court system. And guess what? Her ultimate dream was to become a nurse.
She just had got a promotion on her job. I mean, she was getting ready to go back to school, you know. She had so many plans at such a young age.
So basically, she wanted to go from enforcing the law to caring for people in their times of need. I think we can all grab a page from her book here. But Mackie's vision for a better future went beyond her job. She was also actively involved in community activities. She volunteered at local shelters, participated in food drives, and was always ready to listen to someone who needed to talk. So when Mackie passed away that day, all of that beautiful energy went away too. It was obviously such a huge blow for her family, her loved ones, and basically anyone who was ever lucky enough to spend some time in her presence.
I just can't imagine my life without her, but I want to say that I love her and I want to thank her for helping me out in life, helping me with my kids, babysitting, you know, and just being an amazing person and loving person.
When the news of her passing spread, the outpouring of grief was overwhelming. Tributes from friends and family started pouring in, each one being a reminder of just how special Mackie was. Just listen to what her aunt had to say.
And I'm a lover forever, and I won't never let her name die, never. It won't never die down, because no matter what I'm gonna fight for, I will fight for till the last breath in my body. When we love you, Mackie, our whole family, we crushed.
It's pretty clear now just how devastating just a few seconds of fire can be to an entire community, right? So, now you're probably wondering what really happened. I mean, we know that her profession was dangerous, so we can't rule out the possibility of a deranged ex-con who took matters into his own hands that day. We also know that her neighborhood was pretty famous for random acts of violence. So which one is it? Stick around as we unpack this tricky case. All right, let's talk about what really happened to Chanterria Albert. When the call came in that night about the shooting on Park Avenue, the officers were quick to arrive at the scene. They found Chanterria and another victim had already been taken to the hospital, and their lives were hanging by a thread. It was chaos. Casings everywhere, witnesses in shock, and a desperate need to figure out what really happened. But despite the quick response, things were still pretty unclear. Witnesses saw a black car roll up, windows down, and then shots were fired. Identifying the shooters was going to be tough. The Opelousas Police Department was already struggling with low paychecks and not having enough officers.
The governor made a clear statement that, we all are suffering from personnel shortage. So, of course, we could use more police officers, and if we had more police officers on the street. But, of course, as you know and I know, Opelousas PD in this parish is the least amount paid law enforcement agency.
So the department was pretty much doing the best it could. But the thing is, crime rates in that area are completely shocking, and no matter how much they would have loved to figure out exactly who was responsible for Mackey, there was a larger picture to consider here as well, and that is keeping a whole community safe. One big problem here was the fear of retaliation. Even though witnesses saw the black car, many were scared to even come forward. This kind of silence is pretty common in violent neighborhoods, so no surprise there. People are completely terrified of getting involved because the risks are high. This, in turn, makes solving cases even harder for law enforcement. Someone did take the time to speak to all the cameras, however. Enter Mason Decker, Mackey's neighbor.
It's not nothing new. It's not nothing new. You hear every day. It's scary living in this neighborhood. It's like people, they don't care nowadays. They do anything to you.
Now, I don't know about you, but the fact that violence like this has become so normalized in many neighborhoods throughout the U.S. is truly heartbreaking. Can you even imagine hearing gunfire so often that it feels normal? But back to the larger picture here, for lack of a better term. Just looking at the numbers, you can clearly see that Louisiana has a real problem with gun violence.
Authorities in southern Louisiana say a man killed as many as 3 people and wounded a local politician and 2 others before taking his own life.
I don't feel like it's acceptable, because if we do the work, get people off the street, and the next thing we see them before we even get home.
According to the CDC, Louisiana often ranks among the states with the highest rates of shootings. In 2021, it had the second highest gun-related mortality rate in the U.S., with 23.4 gun deaths per 100,000 people. For Opelousas, Chanterria's passing was the 3rd homicide of the year. So there's a clear rise in violence. But don't just think about the murders. The number of shootings is also alarming. In 2023, Opelousas reported 84 shootings and 8 homicides. And by early 2024, there had already been 26 shootings, with 7 happening in the past month alone. So can law enforcement even handle these numbers? Well, the short answer to that is no, not really. The violence affects the local economy too. Fear of crime can stop economic growth, halt real estate deals, and keep people from participating in community activities. When you're always worried about your safety, it's hard to focus on building a better life, right? Businesses are hesitant to open, and potential home buyers are scared off, which keeps the cycle of poverty and violence going on even further. Right now, law enforcement is focused on getting justice for Chanterria. They're asking anyone with information that could help solve this case to come forward as soon as possible. The need for answers is urgent, but so is the community's desire to make sure her death wasn't all for nothing. You know, addressing violence in communities like Opelousas isn't just about more policing. It's way, way deeper than that. Have you ever thought about why crime is so high in some places? It's not just bad people doing bad things. There are real issues at play here. Let's try to break it all down. First off, think about the economic inequality. How can we expect people to stay out of trouble when they don't have jobs or money to support their families? After all, desperation can really push people to do things they wouldn't normally do. So, tackling crime should start with creating jobs and economic opportunities, right?
Just about every city in the U.S. has communities where Black people must contend with violence, lack of access to jobs, blighted housing, and poor health.
In places like Opelousas, this is particularly true. Imagine if there were more job training programs and other educational opportunities. If people had a clear path to stable employment, then they wouldn't be as likely to turn to a life of crime. It's a pretty well-known fact that crimes such as the one Mackie was a victim of tend to happen in places where people don't really have much to look forward to anyway. And speaking of looking forward to something, education is another big piece of this puzzle.
I had my brothers be swallowed by the mass criminal industrial complex, right? At a time when which education was breaking down and people were forced to do things that were not of their best interest.
Underfunded schools and limited access to quality education can keep people stuck in cycles of poverty and crime.
And I've had the conversations with them that they wish they didn't have to do. But at that time, they felt they were literally forced. They couldn't go to school because they didn't have clean clothes. They were hungry at nights going to sleep.
Imagine if every kid in Opelousas had access to things like great schools, after-school programs, and even scholarships. Wouldn't that make a difference? Keeping young people engaged and focused on their futures can help steer them away from negative influences. I mean, you gotta break the cycle somehow, and investing in these little kids seems like a great idea. And yeah, all of that sounds great, but we can't forget that there are some sides to this struggle that can't really be seen through the naked eye. How often do we hear about crimes committed by people who have untreated mental health issues? Quite a bit, unfortunately.
Louisiana coming in at number 11 with 27.79% of adults with a cognitive disability who were not able to see a doctor due to financial costs, with 62.5% of youth who had a major depressive episode in the past year who did not receive mental health services.
This association estimates that sheriff's offices across the entire state are currently short by roughly 1,800 deputies, which is creating longer emergency response times.
You can pay police officers more. That's one way. We see this again around the nation.
What if we advocated for better funding and higher wages for police officers? It could help them do their jobs more effectively. And what about community policing? Building relationships between officers and residents can foster trust and cooperation, making neighborhoods safer.
The surveys of police officers done, we don't do this for the money, and we don't even do it because, we don't even stop doing it because we're worried about getting hurt. We walk away from this profession because we don't want to get indicted for doing our job.
Community support and involvement are also crucial. Residents need to feel like they have a stake in their neighborhood's safety. Neighborhood watch programs, community meetings, and local volunteer initiatives can empower residents. These programs act as deterrents to crime and help build stronger, more resilient communities. And let's talk about gun control for a minute. It's a touchy subject, I know, but it's a pretty important conversation to have.
So, congratulations, Louisiana has become the 28th state to pass constitutional carry, or in plain language, permitless carry.
Lacking a permit, then you're lacking training. The trends are showing that the gun violence in the states that do not require permits are just on a significant increase. And so if we see these patterns, then things are just going to continuously get worse.
Practical regulations on firearm sales and ownership can reduce the likelihood of guns falling into the wrong hands. Things like background checks, waiting periods, and restrictions on certain types of firearms are measures that can help decrease gun violence. Don't you think it's worth trying? As we come to the end of this discussion, I can't help but feel a profound sense of loss for Chanterria Albert. Her story isn't just another entry in a police report or a headline in the news. She was the real deal, a young, ambitious woman who was just getting her start in life. Mackie was a person you could rely on. She embodied what it meant to serve her community, to bring justice and compassion into a world that really needs it. Remember, at just 22 years old, she was already training to be a court liaison and had dreams of becoming a nurse. Can you imagine the kind of impact she would have had with that kind of dedication and ambition? And just think about her mom for a second here. They were like two peas in a pod. Imagine the gap that Mackie's passing brought in her life. No mother should ever go through burying her own child. Her friends and family described her as ride or die. Someone who was always there, no questions asked. Even at such a young age, she took on responsibilities and acted as a mentor to many. Her untimely death left a massive void, Not just because it was the loss of another human being, but because of the potential and promise that will never be realized. So, you know when something tragic happens, it's not just about the person directly affected, you know? The whole community feels it. Think about it. She was just starting out in her career, trying to make a difference, and then, with no warning, all of it is taken away from her. It's a wake-up call for everybody else, you know? Makes you realize how tough it can be for people in law enforcement, especially when they're just starting out. But despite the huge risks, Chanterria didn't back down. She kept pushing forward, trying to make the world a better place. And that's exactly what we need to remember, moving forward. Chanterria wasn't just a victim. Her dreams might not have come true, but the way she lived her life, full of compassion and dedication, that's what we need to hold on to. We gotta keep her spirit alive by spreading kindness and fighting for justice, just like she would have wanted.
And at the end of the day, when everybody's gonna move on with their life, every holiday, every Christmas, every birthday, we're gonna celebrate you no matter what. And I just want the world to know that we love you and you was a special person. And God chose the best angel ever to guide us in life.
So let's keep her memory alive, okay? Let's honor Chanterria by carrying forward the values she stood for. In a world that can be pretty dark sometimes, let's be the light, just like she was. That's how we keep her legacy going strong, guiding us toward a brighter and more compassionate future.